It's been over a year since Young Sheldon aired its final episode, and while time has gently softened most of the emotional edges, there's one detail, just one, that still nags at me. It's not the brilliant performances, not the way it bridged the tone between The Big Bang Theory and its prequel, nor even the departure of characters we came to love like family. No, what haunts me is subtler. Less about drama, more about emotional dissonance. It's how the show treated George Sr., Sheldon's father, in his final stretch. To be fair, young Sheldon accomplished something many prequels struggle with. It made us care deeply about a story whose endpoint we already knew. Fans of The Big Bang Theory were well aware from the start that George Sr. was doomed. Adult Sheldon, voiced by Jim Parsons, often painted his father as an oafish, absent figure. A man who cheated, drank too much, and died young. So imagine the emotional recalibration required when young Sheldon gave us a George Sr. who was flawed, yes, but also loving, protective, and deeply committed to his family. That's why the finale's handling of his death felt jarring. Not because it happened, we expected that, but because of the how. The why, or more precisely, the lack of why. For several seasons, the writers methodically rewrote George's narrative. They softened his rougher edges, contextualized his drinking as stress-induced rather than abusive, and cast Lance Barber's portrayal with so much warmth that it made you question Sheldon's reliability as a narrator. George was gruff but never cruel. He was tired, overworked, and often overlooked, but his love for his children, especially Sheldon, never wavered. And yet, in the final episodes, when the show had a chance to reconcile these two portrayals, young Sheldon's George and The Big Bang Theory's memory of him, it didn't. There was no climactic argument, no final betrayal that might explain older Sheldon's bitterness. No pivotal moment that said, that's why he remembers him like that. Instead, George Sr. dies off-screen, suddenly, with little closure. The family learns about it via a phone call. One scene later, it's already the funeral. And yes, I understand the creative choice. Death, especially sudden death, is often anticlimactic. It doesn't wait for plot points to resolve or emotional arcs to finish. But this is television, and more importantly, this is Young Sheldon, a show that's spent years carefully rehabilitating a character only to let his narrative end with a muted whimper. It's not the abruptness of his death that bothers me, it's the missed opportunity for emotional reconciliation. I kept waiting for a moment. A scene, something. Maybe George and Sheldon have one final heart-to-heart. Maybe Sheldon overhears his dad defending him. Or maybe, in a painful but necessary twist, George does disappoint Sheldon in a way that sticks, helping explain Sheldon's cold, confused memories years later. But none of that comes. The writers seemed to hope the emotional weight of death alone would carry the narrative. And yes, it was sad. The funeral scenes were beautifully acted, the grief palpable. But emotionally speaking, it felt like a baton dropped, not passed. What's worse is how it inadvertently undermines The Big Bang Theory's canon. After watching Young Sheldon, it becomes hard to believe Sheldon's adult memories. You find yourself thinking, that's not the man we watched for 7 seasons. That's not the man who made breakfast while holding a coffee mug in one hand and existential exhaustion in the other. And maybe that's the point, that Sheldon, as a child genius, misunderstood or misremembered his dad. But if so, the show should have leaned into that idea. It could have given us an older Sheldon, in voiceover, reflecting, I didn't understand him then. But now, I see him differently. Instead, the narrative seemed to freeze. George Sr.'s death was treated like a narrative endpoint, not a character climax. A scene designed to make us cry, but not think. That's what doesn't sit right with me. Over a year later, I still think about what might have been. A moment between George and Mary, perhaps, where he confesses his fear of failing the kids. A small conversation with Georgie or Missy that shows how hard he's trying. Or a rare breakthrough with Sheldon, something raw, something real, before life cuts the thread. Maybe I'm asking too much. Maybe the show was trying to avoid melodrama. Maybe the writers were staying true to how messy life, and memory, can be. But still, it lingers. That absence of finality, that silence where closure might have been. We loved George Sr. not because he was perfect, but because he wasn't. He was a working-class dad trying to do right by a brilliant, impossible son. A husband and father doing his best despite the odds. To let him go without a final word felt unfair, not just to the character, but to the fans who saw in him a reflection of their own fathers, their own flawed but trying role models. I can't help but imagine a scene that never aired. Adult Sheldon, years later, perhaps speaking at a lecture or flipping through an old photo album. He pauses on a picture of his father, and we hear Jim Parsons' voice say, softly, "I didn't always understand him. But I think, in his own way, he understood me." Just that. Just a moment of acknowledgement. Because the beauty of young Sheldon was always in its humanity. In the little imperfections. In the quiet ways people love one another, even when they don't say it out loud. George Sr. embodied that more than anyone. And that's why, over a year later, his farewell still doesn't sit right with me. Let me know if you'd like a version with a more humorous or critical tone.